I didn't recognize the sound at first. It was the kind of memory that arrives without knocking, quiet, almost polite. A faint echo buried somewhere deep, like a song you once knew but couldn't quite place. But the moment I heard it again, clear, sharp, and unmistakable, something inside me shifted. Because I had heard that sound before, and it came from that night. At 64, you begin to believe that most of life has already revealed itself to you. The surprises are smaller, the days quieter, the people around you predictable. I lived alone in a modest house at the edge of town. White walls that needed repainting, a kitchen that still smelled faintly of cinnamon and boiled tea leaves, and a living room where the clock ticked louder than any television I ever owned. My husband, Ronan, passed away 12 years ago, a soft-spoken man who never raised his voice, not even when he had reason to. After he was gone, the silence in the house changed. It wasn't peaceful at first. It was heavy, like something unfinished still lingered in the air. But over time, I learned to sit with it. My son, Colton, visited when he could. He had his own life, his own responsibilities, a job that kept him busy, a wife who I never quite understood. Her name was Delilah. Delilah had a way of smiling without warmth, not cruel exactly, just distant, as if every interaction was a formality she was obligated to complete. Still, I tried, I always tried, because that's what you do with family. You keep the peace even when the peace feels one-sided. They lived about 20 minutes away, close enough for weekend dinners, far enough for excuses. Most Sundays I would cook something simple, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, sometimes a pie if I had the energy. Colton would sit at the table scrolling through his phone between bites. Delilah would compliment the food politely, always using the same tone, the same words. "It's lovely, Margaret. Always lovely, never more, never less." I got used to that too. The night everything began to change was, oddly enough, a quiet one. It was raining, not heavily. Just a soft, steady drizzle that tapped gently against the windows. I had made myself a cup of tea and settled into my usual chair, the one by the lamp with the faded yellow shade. I wasn't expecting anyone. So when I heard a sound from the back of the house, I assumed it was the wind. A soft thud, then something sharper, like metal against wood. I remember pausing, holding my breath without realizing it, listening carefully. The house felt different, not louder, not quieter, just aware. I stood slowly, setting my cup down on the small table beside me. The tea trembled slightly in the cup, ripples spreading outward. Another sound, this time closer, a scrape. I told myself it was nothing. Old houses make noises, wood shifts, pipes rattle, it happens. But something in my chest didn't agree. I walked toward the hallway, my steps slower than usual, careful, measured. The back door was at the end of that hall, and as I approached it, I noticed something that didn't sit right. The door was slightly open, just a fraction. Enough to let the cold air slip inside, enough to make the curtain beside it sway gently. I was certain, absolutely certain, that I had locked it. I always did. That was one habit I never forgot. My hand reached for the light switch, but I stopped halfway. Because I heard it again, that sound, a faint metallic click. It came from outside. No, not outside, right at the threshold. I remember calling out, my voice steadier than I felt. "Hello?" No answer, just the rain, and then footsteps, soft, quick, moving away. I opened the door fully this time, my heart beating louder than the rain. The porch light flickered on, casting a pale glow over the wet ground. But there was no one there. Only the empty yard, only the sound of rain tapping against the leaves. And yet, something told me I hadn't been alone. The next morning I noticed the drawer. It was in the hallway, a small wooden drawer where I kept old letters, spare keys, things I rarely touched. It was slightly open, just enough to be noticeable. At first I thought I had left it that way. Age does that sometimes. You forget small things, but when I pulled it open, I saw it immediately. The envelope, it was missing. A plain, yellowed envelope I hadn't opened in years. I stood there for a long time, staring into that drawer as if the envelope might somehow reappear if I looked hard enough. But it didn't, and I couldn't remember the last time I had even thought about it, only that it mattered. Somehow, it mattered. I didn't tell Colton. What would I say? That I heard noises in the night? That a drawer had been opened? It sounded fragile, like the kind of thing people dismiss with a gentle smile and quiet concern, so I said nothing. Days passed, then weeks. The house returned to its usual rhythm. The ticking clock, the quiet mornings, the occasional visits. Life, as it often does, tried to move forward, and I let it, until that afternoon. Delilah was in my kitchen. She had come over unexpectedly saying Colton was working late and she didn't want to be alone. I remember noticing how comfortable she seemed, moving around the kitchen as if it were her own, opening cabinets without asking, pouring herself tea without waiting. I watched her from the doorway. Something about her presence felt different, not wrong, just familiar in a way I couldn't explain. Then she reached into the drawer by the sink, not the hallway drawer, a different one, but the sound it made, that soft, metallic click, it was the same, exactly the same, and suddenly, I wasn't standing in my kitchen anymore. I was back in that hallway, back in that moment, hearing that sound, feeling that unease. And for the first time in 12 years, a memory I had buried carefully, deliberately began to rise, slowly, reluctantly, but unmistakably. I looked at Delilah. Really looked at her, at the way her fingers moved, the way she paused for just a second too long before closing the drawer, and something inside me whispered, quietly but firmly, "You've seen this before." Not just the sound, not just the feeling, her. I didn't say anything. Not yet, but that night I didn't sleep, because the memory kept coming back, piece by piece, and with every piece the truth felt closer and heavier. I didn't sleep that night, not in any real sense. I lay in bed with my eyes closed, but my mind kept turning, slow, deliberate, like pages of a book I hadn't opened in years. Every small detail from that rainy night began to return, not all at once, but in fragments. The sound, the door, the drawer, and now Delilah. It didn't make sense, not yet, but something inside me had already begun to rearrange the past, quietly shifting things into place. The next morning, the house felt different again. It wasn't fear, not exactly, it was awareness. The kind that makes you notice things you once ignored. I noticed how the floor creaked near the hallway drawer, one long, low sound if you stepped too close to the left side. I noticed how the back door latch gave a soft metallic click when it wasn't fully secured. The same click. I stood there for a moment, gently opening and closing it. Click again, click. The sound settled into me like confirmation, not surprise, because I knew now that was the sound I had heard that night, not random, not imagined. Something or someone had touched that door. Later that afternoon, Colton called. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice distracted like it often was. "Delilah told me she stopped by yesterday." "She did," I replied, keeping my tone even. A pause. "How was that?" I glanced toward the kitchen where everything sat exactly as it should. Clean, still, ordinary. "It was fine," I said. Another pause. I could hear typing in the background, the faint hum of his office life bleeding into our conversation. "She said you seemed a little off." I smiled faintly, though there was no one there to see it. "Did she?" "Yeah, just tired, I guess." "I didn't sleep well," I said truthfully. "That happens," he replied quickly, almost relieved to have an explanation. "You want me to come by this weekend?" I hesitated. "Maybe," I said. "We'll see." "All right, just call if you need anything, okay?" "I will." We hung up shortly after. The conversation stayed with me, though not because of what Colton said, but because of what he didn't. He hadn't asked why I seemed off. He hadn't asked what happened. He had accepted Delilah's version of things without question. And that wasn't new. By evening, I found myself standing in front of the hallway drawer again. I hadn't opened it since that morning weeks ago, not fully, not properly. My hand rested on the handle for a long time. There's a certain kind of hesitation that comes when you know something might change once you look closely enough. But eventually, I pulled it open. Slowly. The contents were exactly as I remembered, neatly arranged, untouched except for the missing envelope. Old letters tied with a faded ribbon. A small tin box with spare keys. A photograph face down. I picked that up first. It was of Ronan and me, taken years ago at a family gathering. We were standing side by side, not quite smiling, but content. There was someone else in the background, slightly out of focus. I squinted at it. A woman, younger, standing just behind us. I turned the photo slightly, angling it toward the light, and there she was, Delilah, not as she is now, but unmistakably her hair darker, her expression softer. But the same eyes, the same stillness behind them. I felt something tighten in my chest, because I didn't remember her being there that day. That evening, I made myself tea again. It had become a kind of ritual, something steady to hold on to while everything else felt uncertain. I sat by the window this time, watching the street instead of the clock, and I let the memory come. I didn't fight it. It had been 12 years ago, the same year Ronan passed, but before that, a few months before, it was late. Not raining that night, but quiet in the same way. Ronan had gone to bed early. He wasn't feeling well, said he was tired. I stayed up reading something I can't remember now, and then the sound, that same metallic click. I remember thinking it was Ronan at first. Maybe he had gotten up for water, but when I checked the bedroom, he was still there, sleeping, or pretending to. I couldn't tell anymore, so I went to the hallway. And just like that rainy night, the back door was slightly open. I closed my eyes now, sitting in the present, letting the memory sharpen. There had been something else, something I hadn't understood at the time. Footsteps, not leaving, coming in, soft, careful. I hadn't seen who it was. I remember that clearly now. I had hesitated. Stayed just out of sight, watching the edge of the hallway. And then, a shadow moved. Quick, familiar in shape but not in certainty. I had told myself it was nothing, that I was imagining things, that grief anticipating Ronan's illness, though I hadn't yet admitted it, was playing tricks on me. So I went back to bed, and I let it go. But now it didn't feel like imagination. Now it felt like something I had chosen not to see. The next day, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years. I drove to Colton's house without calling first. It wasn't far. The same 20-minute drive, the same quiet roads, but everything felt different now, sharper, more deliberate. When I arrived, Delilah answered the door. She looked surprised, but only for a second. Then her usual expression settled in. "Margaret," she said, that same polite tone, "you should have called." "I was nearby," I replied, a small lie. She stepped aside to let me in. The house smelled faintly of lavender and something sweet, too sweet, almost artificial. "Colton's at work," she said as I entered. "I know." She paused just briefly, then nodded. "Can I get you something? Tea?" "No, thank you." I moved slowly through the living room, taking in the space. It was tidy, carefully arranged, nothing out of place, but something about it felt curated. Like a house meant to be seen, not lived in. "You came all this way just to visit me?" Delilah asked, her voice light, but there was something beneath it. "I wanted to see you," I said. That wasn't entirely untrue. She studied me for a moment, then smiled. That same careful smile. "Well, here I am." We sat across from each other in the living room. The silence stretched a little longer than it should have. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out the photograph. I placed it gently on the table between us. "I found this yesterday," I said. Delilah glanced at it. For a moment her expression didn't change, then something flickered, quick, controlled, but there. "I didn't know you were at this gathering," I continued. She leaned forward slightly, picking up the photo. "Oh, that," she said softly. "Yes. That was a long time ago." "It was," I agreed. "You don't remember?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. I held her gaze. "No," I said. A pause, then she smiled again. "Well, it wasn't very important." She set the photo back down, carefully, almost deliberately. I watched her hands, the way her fingers rested on the edge of the table. Still, controlled, familiar, and then I asked quietly, "Delilah, when did you first meet my son?" Her eyes met mine again. There was no hesitation this time. "About 10 years ago," she said smoothly. "At a conference?" I nodded slowly. 10 years, I repeated. "Yes." Another pause, and then, "Are you sure it wasn't earlier?" The room shifted, not physically, but something in the air changed, subtle but undeniable. Delilah didn't answer right away. She leaned back slightly, crossing her hands in her lap. And for the first time since I had known her, her smile didn't return. Delilah didn't answer right away. She sat there, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her posture as composed as ever. But something in her eyes had shifted. It wasn't fear, not quite, it was calculation. "I don't think I understand what you're asking," she said finally, her voice measured. I nodded slowly as if I had expected that. "Maybe I'm not asking it clearly," I replied. The room felt quieter than it should have. Even the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen seemed to disappear. I leaned forward slightly. "That photo," I said gently. "You're standing behind me and Ronan, that was 12 years ago." "Yes," she said. "And you're telling me you met Colton 10 years ago?" She didn't respond, just looked at me, so I continued. "I may be old, Delilah, but I'm not confused." Her lips pressed together just briefly, then she let out a small breath, not quite a sigh. "More like a release." "I didn't think you'd remember that day," she said quietly. "I didn't," I replied. "Not until recently." Another pause, and now, she asked. Now I remember enough to ask questions. She stood up then slowly, as if needing to move. She walked toward the window, her back to me. The afternoon light fell across her shoulders, outlining her figure in a way that made her seem distant, almost untouchable. "I knew your husband," she said. The words landed softly, but they carried weight. I didn't react immediately. I let the sentence settle, let it breathe in the space between us. How? I asked. She hesitated, then turned around. We met through mutual friends, she said. Years ago, before Colton and I ever crossed paths. I watched her carefully, and you never thought to mention that. It didn't seem necessary. A faint tightening in my chest. It didn't seem necessary, I repeated. No, she said. It was in the past. I let out a quiet breath. The past has a way of staying with us, I said. She didn't answer. Instead, she walked back to the table and picked up the photograph again. Her fingers lingered on it this time. You look happy here, she said, almost absently. I followed her gaze. We were, I replied, another silence. And then I asked the question that had been forming in me all morning. Were you at my house that night? Her hands stilled. The photograph didn't move. For a moment, I thought she might pretend not to understand. But she didn't. She just looked at me, directly, calmly. And said, what night? I held her gaze. The night the back door was open, I said, 12 years ago before Ronan passed. A flicker again, there, gone, but real. I don't know what you're talking about, she said. Her voice was steady, too steady. I nodded slowly. Then let me tell you what I remember, I said. I stood up this time, not abruptly, not aggressively, just deliberately. I remember hearing the door, I said, my voice calm. That same metallic click. I remember walking into the hallway and seeing it slightly open. Delilah didn't move. I remember thinking it was Ronan, I continued, but he was in bed. I took a small step forward, and I remember not seeing who came in. That last part lingered because now it felt less like truth and more like something incomplete. Delilah's expression didn't change, but her silence did. It wasn't empty anymore, it was full of something unspoken. You're remembering things after all this time, she said finally. Memories can be unreliable. Yes, I agreed. They can. Another step, but sounds, I added softly, they don't change. Her eyes flickered just for a second. That click, I said. I heard it again yesterday in my kitchen when you opened the drawer. Her breath caught, barely, but I saw it. And in that moment, something inside me settled, not relief, not yet, but certainty. I think you should go home, Margaret, she said. The tone had changed, still polite, but firmer now, as if she were trying to close a door that had already been opened. I will, I said. Soon. I gestured toward the photograph. But before I do, I'd like you to tell me the truth. She didn't respond, so I said it plainly. Why were you in my house that night? The question hung between us, heavy, unavoidable. Delilah looked down at the photograph again. Then slowly she placed it back on the table. Her fingers lingered there for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was quieter than before. I wasn't in your house, she said. I waited, because something in her tone told me she wasn't finished. I was outside, she added. The room seemed to tilt just slightly, not enough to unbalance me, but enough to change everything. Outside, I repeated. She nodded. Yes. I held her gaze. And the door, I asked. I didn't open it, she said quickly, too quickly. The kind of quickness that doesn't come from truth but from preparation. I noticed it, stored it. You were just outside, I said. Yes. In the rain? It wasn't raining that night, she corrected automatically. I didn't smile, but something inside me did, a small, quiet recognition. Because I hadn't mentioned rain, not this time. You remember the weather, I said softly. She froze just for a moment. And then she started, but stopped. Her composure cracked, not dramatically, not in a way anyone else might notice, but I did. Because I had been watching her closely from the beginning. I think you should leave, she said again, this time more firmly, and this time I nodded. Yes, I said, I think I should. I picked up my bag, moved toward the door. But before I stepped out, I turned back. One more thing, I said. She didn't look at me, but I continued anyway. The envelope that went missing from my drawer, I said, the one from that same night. Her shoulders stiffened, barely, but enough. I don't suppose you know anything about that either? She didn't answer, didn't turn around, didn't move, and that was answer enough. The drive home felt longer than usual, not because of distance, but because of weight. Everything I had suspected was no longer just suspicion. It had shape now, edges, details, but still not the whole picture. When I got home, I didn't sit down. I went straight to the hallway drawer again, opened it fully this time, removed everything, letters, keys, photographs, all of it. I spread them across the table, carefully, methodically. And then I looked for what wasn't there, the envelope. I tried to remember what had been inside it, not just that it mattered, but why. I closed my eyes, let the memory come again, not forcing it, just allowing it, and slowly, very slowly, a name surfaced. Not mine, not Ronan S., and not Colton's. Delilah, my eyes opened, and the realization settled in, quiet but undeniable. The envelope hadn't just been important, it had been about her. The name stayed with me, Delilah. It didn't arrive like a revelation. There was no sudden rush of clarity, no dramatic shift in the room around me. It was quieter than that, like something that had always been there, simply choosing at last to be seen. I sat at the table for a long time, the contents of the drawer spread out before me, letters I hadn't read in years, photographs from a life that felt both distant and familiar, and in the center of it all an absence, the missing envelope. Now it had a shape, now it had a purpose, now it had a name. I tried to remember when I had first received it, not the exact date, not the time, just the feeling, because feelings, they tend to stay longer than facts, and slowly it came back. It had been a Tuesday, I remember, because I had just come back from the market. There was a bag of apples on the kitchen counter, still untouched. Ronan was in the living room watching something quietly on television, and there was a knock at the door, not loud. Not urgent, just deliberate. I opened it to find a woman I didn't recognize. She was younger then, her hair darker, her posture straighter, but her eyes, even now I remember those eyes, calm, still, observing more than they revealed. "Mrs. Harris?" she had asked. I nodded. "Yes." She handed me the envelope without stepping inside. "This is for you," she said. Her voice was polite, careful, as if every word had been measured beforehand. "Who is it from?" I asked. She hesitated, just briefly, then said, "It's important." And before I could ask anything more, she turned and walked away. I never invited her in, that part stayed clear. She remained outside, always outside. I remember closing the door slowly, the envelope still in my hand. It felt heavier than it should have, not physically, but with meaning. I didn't open it right away. Some part of me already understood that whatever was inside would change something, so I waited, until later that evening, until Ronan had gone to bed. I opened it alone, at the kitchen table. Under the soft yellow light that made everything feel quieter than it was. Inside, there were only a few pages, no greeting, no signature, just words. I don't remember every sentence, but I remember enough. Enough to understand why I folded it carefully afterward and placed it in that drawer. Enough to understand why I never spoke of it again. It wasn't written with anger, that's what stayed with me. It wasn't cruel, it was factual, almost gentle in its honesty. And that made it harder. It spoke of Ronan not as I knew him, but as someone else had. It spoke of meetings, conversations, moments I had never seen, and at the center of it all a name, Delilah. I remember sitting there for a long time after reading it, the house quiet, the clock ticking, Ronan asleep down the hall, and me trying to decide what to do with a truth I hadn't asked for. In the end, I chose silence, not because I didn't believe it, but because I didn't know what believing it would require of me. Ronan was already unwell. I had seen the signs, even if we hadn't spoken about them directly. And something in me, something quiet and tired, decided that whatever had happened in the past would stay there. So I folded the pages, placed them back in the envelope, and put it away. I never confronted him, never asked, never gave the truth a voice. And eventually time did what it always does. It softened the edges, blurred the details. Until the envelope became just another object in a drawer. Something I knew was there, but chose not to touch. Until it disappeared. I opened my eyes again, back in the present. The room felt smaller now, closer. As if the past had stepped forward and taken up space beside me. "She knew," I whispered, the words barely audible, but they settled heavily in the air. Delilah hadn't just been connected to that letter, she had been the one who delivered it. And then, 12 years ago, she had returned. The realization didn't bring anger, not immediately. It brought something else, something quieter, a kind of clarity that doesn't rush but doesn't leave either. I stood up slowly, walked to the window. The sky outside was pale, the afternoon fading into evening. And I understood something then that I hadn't allowed myself to see before. This hadn't been random, not the letter, not the visit, not even her presence in my son's life. This had been a continuation. That night I didn't wait, I didn't sit with the thoughts. I didn't let them settle into silence again. I picked up the phone and I called Colton. He answered on the third ring. "Mom, I need you to come over," I said. There was a pause. "Is everything okay?" "No," I replied. "It is." That got his attention. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said. He arrived in 15. When I opened the door, I saw it immediately. Concern, real concern, not distracted, not distant. For a moment, he was just my son again, not someone caught between two lives. "Just Colton, what's wrong?" he asked as he stepped inside. I didn't answer right away. I led him into the living room, gestured for him to sit. He did, watching me closely now. "I need to ask you something," I said. "Okay, when did you meet Delilah?" He frowned slightly. "I told you before, Mom, about 10 years ago at that conference." I nodded. "And before that, what do you mean, before that, Colton?" He shook his head. "I didn't know her before that." I held his gaze. "Are you sure?" A pause, then, "Yes." I studied his face, the way his eyes held mine, the slight tension in his jaw, and I believed him, not because I wanted to, but because I knew him. He wasn't lying, which meant whatever this was. It hadn't started with him. "Did Delilah ever tell you she knew your father?" I asked. His expression changed, not dramatically, but enough. "What?" he said. "Did she ever mention it?" "No," he replied quickly. "Why would she?" I let the silence stretch. Then I said quietly, "Because she did." The room shifted again. Colton sat back slightly, confusion replacing concern. "That doesn't make sense," he said. "I know," I replied, "but it's true." He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. "Mom, what is this about?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and for a moment I saw the boy he used to be, the one who trusted easily, who believed the world made sense. "This is about a night 12 years ago," I said, "and a letter I never showed anyone." He didn't interrupt, didn't question, he just listened, and for the first time I was ready to tell it. Colton didn't move, not even when I sat down across from him. He just watched me, his eyes searching my face as if trying to understand what kind of conversation this was going to be and whether he was ready for it. I don't think he was. But then again, neither was I. "There was a letter," I said. My voice was steady but softer than usual, not fragile, just careful. "What letter?" he asked. I folded my hands in my lap the way I often did when I needed to keep them from trembling. "It came about 12 years ago," I said. "A few months before your father passed." He leaned forward slightly. "Why didn't you ever tell me about it?" "Because I chose not to," I replied. The answer was simple, but it carried years inside it. I told him everything, not in a rush. Not all at once. I let the story unfold the way it had returned to me slowly, piece by piece. The knock on the door, the woman who didn't come inside, the envelope, the words inside it, and the name, Delilah. Colton didn't interrupt, not once. But I could see it in his face, the shift from confusion to disbelief to something harder, something heavier. "That's not possible," he said when I finished. I didn't argue. "I thought the same thing," I said. "She never said anything," he continued. "Not once, I know." "She wouldn't," he stopped himself, shaking his head. "This doesn't make any sense." "No," I agreed. "It doesn't." The room fell quiet, the kind of quiet that settles after something has been said that cannot be taken back. Colton stood up abruptly, pacing once across the room before turning back to me. "Why now?" he asked. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I didn't remember," I said. He frowned. "What do you mean?" "I remembered the letter," I explained, "but not her. Not clearly, not until yesterday." I told him about the drawer, the missing envelope, the sound, and how it had all come back. "You think she took it?" he asked. "I don't think," I said. "I'm certain." He stared at me. "Why would she do that?" "That," I said quietly, "is what we need to find out." He let out a long breath, rubbing his temples as if trying to push the situation into something more manageable. This is crazy," he muttered. "It feels that way," I said, "but it is." There was a pause, then I said something I hadn't planned to say but knew I had to. "I want to see her today." Colton's head snapped up. "You what?" "I went to your house. Why didn't you call me?" "Because I needed to speak to her alone." He shook his head, frustration creeping into his voice. "And," I held his gaze, "she was there that night." The words landed harder this time because now they weren't just memories, they were accusations. Colton let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "No," he said. "No, that's not. She would have told me. She didn't tell you she knew your father either. That's different." "Is it?" He didn't answer because he didn't know how. "She admitted she was outside," I continued. "She didn't deny that." Colton's expression tightened. "But she said she didn't come in," I added. "And you believe her?" I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I asked him a question. "Do you?" That stopped him. He looked away then, toward the window. And for the first time since he arrived, I saw doubt, not certainty, not denial, just doubt. "I need to talk to her," he said finally. "I know, I'm going home," I nodded. "I'll come with you." He hesitated, then gave a small, reluctant nod. Okay. The drive was quiet. Neither of us spoke much. There are moments in life when words feel unnecessary, not because there's nothing to say, but because everything that needs to be said is already understood. This was one of those moments. When we arrived, the house looked exactly as it had earlier that day. Neat, still, unchanged, but the feeling was different, heavier, more exposed. Colton unlocked the door and stepped inside. Delilah, he called. No answer. He moved further in. Delilah. This time her voice came from the kitchen. I'm here. We found her standing by the counter, a cup in her hand. She looked between us. First Colton, then me, and in that brief moment I saw it, not surprise, not fear, but recognition. As if she had been expecting this. You're back, she said to me. I am, I replied. Colton stepped forward. What's going on? He asked, his voice sharper now. Delilah set the cup down slowly. I think your mother is confused, she said calmly. I'm not confused, I said. She didn't look at me. She kept her eyes on Colton. She came by earlier and started asking strange questions, Delilah continued. About your father, about things that don't make sense. Colton turned to her. Did you know my father? The question hung there, direct, unavoidable. Delilah didn't answer right away. She just looked at him, and then slowly she nodded. Yes, she said. Colton stepped back slightly as if the floor had shifted beneath him. What? He whispered. It was a long time ago, she said. Why didn't you tell me? It wasn't important. That's not your decision to make. His voice rose, not loud, but enough to crack the calm she usually held so tightly. Delilah's expression changed then, not defensive, not angry, just tired. I didn't think it mattered anymore, she said. It matters now, he replied. I watched them both, the distance between them, the truth sitting in the space neither of them knew how to cross. Were you at my mother's house that night? Colton asked. Delilah's eyes flickered. Just briefly, then steadied. No, she said. I spoke then. She told me she was outside. Colton turned to her. Is that true? Silence, then yes, she said. The room seemed to close in. Colton looked between us, his confusion deepening. Why? He asked. Delilah didn't answer, not right away, and in that pause I realized something. She wasn't deciding what to say, she was deciding how much. I went there to speak to your father, she said finally. Colton's breath caught. What? I needed to see him, she continued. About what? Delilah's gaze shifted, not to me, not fully to Colton, just somewhere in between. About the letter, she said. The words settled heavily in the room because now we were no longer circling the truth. We were standing inside it. About the letter. The words didn't echo, they didn't need to, they landed exactly where they were meant to. Colton looked at her as if he no longer recognized the person standing in front of him. What letter? He asked. His voice was quieter now, not sharp, not angry, just unsteady. Delilah took a slow breath. For the first time since I had known her, she didn't seem in control of the room. She reached for the edge of the counter, resting her fingers there lightly, as if grounding herself. You were never supposed to know about it, she said. Colton let out a short, hollow laugh. Well, that's a little late now, isn't it? She didn't respond to that. Instead, she looked at me, and in her eyes there was something I hadn't expected. Not guilt, not quite, something closer to resignation. You kept it, she said to me. I nodded. I did. Her lips pressed together. I wondered if you would. And you came back for it, I replied. It wasn't a question. She didn't deny it. Colton's gaze moved between us. Someone explain this to me, he said. His voice carried a quiet urgency now, not anger, not yet, but something close to it. I spoke first. The letter described a relationship between your father and Delilah. Colton's face went still. A relationship, he repeated. I nodded once. Yes, he turned to Delilah slowly. Is that true? There are moments when silence says more than words ever could. This was one of them because Delilah didn't answer immediately, and in that hesitation the truth was already there. Yes, she said. Colton stepped back again, not dramatically, just enough to create space, as if he needed distance from the word itself. How long? He asked. Delilah's voice was steady when she answered. A few months. And you thought it wasn't important to tell me that you had an affair with my father? Her expression tightened. It wasn't like that. Colton let out a breath that sounded more like disbelief than anything else. Then what was it like? Delilah looked down at her hands. For the first time, she didn't seem composed. She seemed tired. Your father was already unwell, she said quietly. We met through a support group. We talked. That's how it started. That doesn't answer the question, Colton said. No, she agreed. It doesn't. I watched her carefully because now the pieces were moving, not into place, but into view. It wasn't meant to become anything, she continued. It just did. Colton shook his head. That's what people always say. She didn't argue, and the letter. I asked. Delilah looked at me again. I wrote it, she said. The room fell into a deeper kind of silence, because now there was no distance left between us and the truth. You wrote it, I repeated. Yes, and you brought it to my door. She nodded. I didn't think you deserved to be lied to, she said. The sentence was calm, carefully spoken, but something in it felt incomplete. Then why didn't you come inside? I asked. Her gaze faltered. I couldn't, she said. Why not? A pause. Longer this time? Because if I had, she said quietly, I might not have left. The honesty of it, unexpected, uncomfortable, but real. Colton turned away, running his hands through his hair again. This is insane, he muttered. No, I said softly, it's just late. He looked at me. What does that mean? It means the truth didn't arrive when it should have, I said. So now it feels heavier than it needs to. Delilah didn't speak. She just stood there, her hands still resting on the counter. And that night, I asked, her eyes lifted to meet mine again. You came back, I said. Yes. Why? She took a breath, slow, measured. I needed to speak to him, she said. After the letter, after everything, I needed to know what it meant. And her voice softened. He told me it was over. The words were simple, but they carried something final in them. And the envelope, I asked, you took it. This time she didn't hesitate. Yes, she said. Colton looked back at her, confusion deepening again. Why would you take it if you were the one who wrote it? Delilah's gaze dropped briefly, then returned. Because I realized it wasn't mine anymore. I felt something shift in me, not anger, not even hurt. Just understanding, a quiet, complicated understanding. You didn't want it to exist, I said. She nodded. Yes. Colton let out a breath. So you break into my mother's house, take the only proof of what happened, and then marry me years later without saying a word. The question hung there, heavy, unforgiving. Delilah didn't try to defend herself. She didn't raise her voice, didn't step forward. She just stood there and answered. Yes. The honesty of it was almost harder to bear than denial would have been. Colton shook his head slowly. I don't even know what to say to that. Neither did I, because some truths don't leave room for immediate response. They just settle and wait. I never planned for any of this, Delilah said quietly. Colton let out a small, humorless laugh. People rarely do. She looked at him then, really looked at him. I didn't meet you because of him, she said. That part is true. He didn't respond. I didn't even know you were his son when we first met, she added. That made him pause. What? I only realized later, she said. And you still stayed? A long silence. Yes, she said. Colton closed his eyes briefly, not in anger. Not in pain, just in wait. And you never thought I deserved to know? He asked. Delilah's voice was softer now. I thought telling you would destroy something that didn't need to be destroyed. I spoke then, or something you didn't want to lose. She didn't deny it. The three of us stood there, the truth fully present now, not hidden, not softened, just there. And in that moment, I realized something important. This wasn't about revenge, it never had been. It was about seeing clearly. Even when the clarity came late, the room didn't feel tense anymore. It felt still, like everything that needed to surface had already done so, and now all that remained was the quiet aftermath. No raised voices, no dramatic gestures. Just three people standing in the middle of something that had taken years to arrive. Colton was the first to move. He walked past both of us and into the living room, then stopped near the window. His back faced us, but I could see the slight rise and fall of his shoulders. He was trying to steady himself, trying to understand how to place this truth into a life that until a few hours ago had felt solid. I need a minute, he said. Neither of us followed. Some moments belonged to the person living them. Delilah remained where she was, her hands no longer gripping the counter but resting lightly against it now. Her posture had changed, not weaker, just less guarded. I didn't expect it to come out like this, she said quietly. I looked at her. Truth rarely arrives the way we expect it to, I replied. She gave a small nod, then after a pause she said something that lingered. I didn't lie because I enjoyed it. I know, I said. She looked at me as if surprised by that. I understand why people keep certain things hidden, I continued. It doesn't make it right, but it makes it human. That was the first moment her eyes softened, not completely, but enough. I told myself it was over, she said. That whatever happened with your husband stayed in that time, that it didn't need to touch anything else. But it did, I said gently. Yes, she admitted. We stood in silence for a moment, not uncomfortable, just honest. I didn't take the envelope to hurt you, she said. I know, I took it because I was ashamed of it. I nodded slowly, and because you were afraid of what it meant. She didn't answer, but she didn't need to. From the living room, Colton spoke. You both seem very calm about this. His voice wasn't angry, but it carried something heavier than anger. I turned toward him. He was still standing by the window, his reflection faintly visible in the glass. Calm doesn't mean it doesn't matter, I said. He turned then. Then what does it mean? I took a moment before answering. It means we're choosing not to let it destroy more than it already has. He looked at me, searching for something in my face. Maybe permission, maybe direction. I don't know what to do with this, he admitted. That's all right, I said. You don't have to decide everything today. He let out a breath, then looked at Delilah. Did you ever love him? The question came without warning. But it didn't feel impulsive. It felt necessary. Delilah didn't look away this time. She held his gaze, and after a long pause, she answered. No. Colton frowned slightly. Then why? Her voice was quieter now. Because he listened, she said. Because he saw me in a way I didn't feel seen at the time, and because I wasn't strong enough to walk away from something that made me feel understood, even if it was wrong. The honesty in her voice was different now, less controlled, more exposed. Colton nodded slowly, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. And me, he asked. Her expression shifted again, softer, more certain. You're different, she said. He didn't respond. I stayed with you because I chose you, she continued, not because of anything that came before. He looked at her for a long moment, then turned away again. I need time, he said quietly. I understand, she replied. The room settled again, not with resolution, but with acceptance. I picked up my bag. It felt lighter now, not because anything had been undone, but because nothing was hidden anymore. I'm going home, I said. Colton turned back toward me. I'll come by later, he said. I gave a small nod. Take your time. Delilah didn't move as I walked toward the door, but just before I stepped out, she spoke. Margaret, I paused, turned slightly. I am sorry, she said. The words were simple, but they weren't empty. They carried weight, time, regret. I looked at her, and for the first time I saw her not as a question, not as a suspicion, but as a person, complicated, flawed, human. I know, I said, and I meant it. Outside, the air felt cooler. The sky had begun to dim, the soft light of evening settling over everything. I stood there for a moment before walking to my car, not rushing, not lingering, just steady. The drive home was quiet, but not heavy, not like before. When I stepped inside my house, the familiar scent of tea and wood greeted me again. The clock still ticked. The walls still held their silence, but something had changed. Not in the house, in me. I walked to the hallway drawer, opened it, and looked inside. The envelope was still missing, it always would be, but the truth it carried was no longer hidden. I closed the drawer gently, then made myself a cup of tea. Sat in my chair, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something to return. Some things, I realized, don't need to be recovered, they just need to be understood. Later that evening, Colton came by. He didn't say much at first, just sat across from me holding his cup the same way he used to when he was younger, carefully, like he didn't want to spill anything. We're going to take some space, he said after a while. I nodded. That sounds wise. He looked at me. Are you angry? I thought about it, honestly. No, I said. Why not? I smiled faintly, because anger would ask me to carry something I've already put down. He didn't fully understand that, not yet, but he would. I wish you had told me sooner, he said. I know, would it have changed anything? I looked at him, at the man he had become, at the life he had built. Maybe, I said, or maybe it would have just changed the timing. He nodded slowly. Before he left, he paused at the door. Do you regret not saying anything back then? I considered that carefully. No, I said. Why? Because I made the best decision I could with the understanding I had at the time. He seemed to accept that, not completely, but enough. After he left, the house grew quiet again, but this time the quiet felt different, not empty, not heavy, just complete. In that night I slept, not perfectly, but peacefully enough. Because some truths don't come to break you, they come to return something you didn't realize you had lost.